The Bengals lost 25-22 in the Meadowlands, but there's a lot of tape for Cordell Volson, and most of it was good.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you coverage of your Cincinnati Bengals every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Thanks for making us your first listen, for subscribing and following. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And James, as far as I know, the Bengals covered in their 3-point loss against the New York Giants. I think they hit the preseason over in the 30s. And they went into halftime with a lead over the New York Giants starters, with only one, I would say, starter playing for the Cincinnati Bengals, and that was Cordell Volson at left guard. And not only did he start the game, but he played the entire game at left guard, all but just a handful of those snaps with Trey Hill at center to his right, and all of those snaps with Hakeem Adeniji at left tackle to his left. And Cordell Volson, I thought, played a pretty dang good game, James. He had a few really positive run blocking snaps against one or two bad run blocking snaps. He had a whole lot of positive tape in pass protection against a couple of mental lapses. Well, really one mental lapse that I noticed and one physical lapse. One mental lapse coming on a defensive back blitz, a Wink Martindale special that saw the defensive lineman closest to him run away from him and kind of split and try to take his attention away. He couldn't figure out who to block in that moment. By the time he realized the defensive back was coming, it was a little bit too late. The other lapse in pass protection, he just got juked out of his shoes. Just straight up juke moved, which you don't see very often for a guard. That was later in the game. He did get tired as the game went on. But besides that, for the most part, I thought really solid game. Against starters at the start of the game, against Dexter Lawrence, I thought he had a nice combo block with Trey Hill early in the game. So to me, James, this is two solid games for Cordell Volson in the preseason. This one against a higher level of competition, especially early. And we have one poor game from Jackson Carman against a lower quality of competition, plus Carman's unavailability for the last week. Cordell Volson's job to lose, I'd say.
He certainly helped himself. And, he was the leader in the clubhouse going into Sunday's game. And it was kind of one of those things where it was like, all right, can Cordell go out there and be that consistent guy that we've seen in practice? Because he hasn't been perfect in practice, even this past week, as he's taken probably 90% of the snaps with the ones at left guard. But he's been good, and certainly good enough, and has been better than what we saw even last year from Quentin Spain. Like, you're like, oh, can he be that? Because even looking back to March, and when you saw that, the Bengals are probably going to be banking on Jackson Carman, and then the draft, and it's like, yeah, they're banking on Jackson Carman. You were just hoping that Carman would be a competent starting left guard, not a top 5 or top 10 guy. And it just feels like that's what Volson is destined to be. Lyle Collins, I talked to him on Friday, and he's like, oh man, he's just got his makeup. He was praising all the intangible stuff and all of these things that Volson brings. And Anthony Munoz on the broadcast on Sunday night, pad level, things like that. And it's just, you're not hearing any of these like major negatives. And you're right. There are some flaws. He just mentally missed on that defensive back blitz. But you know what I love is the Bengals brought him back out there. And I thought it was going to be maybe just one drive in the second half, but that happened at the end of the first half. And then the start of the second half, he was out there and he blocked well, was opening holes well, and doing his job. And that's the part of it. Like, he's, just this 4th round nobody from North Dakota State, right? It's not like we were talking about him, and I'm not meaning that in a bad way. It's not like we were talking about him a ton before the draft, but he just kind of goes about his business, does his work, and that's kind of what offensive linemen are, especially the good ones. And so I think we've seen a ton to go in that direction. And I would be surprised. I don't think anyone's going to declare him the starter yet at PBS, at least publicly, but I would be surprised if anyone but Cordell Volson is starting at left guard on September 11th against the Pittsburgh Steelers.
He really helped himself. He seized an opportunity. He played well. He played well in the first preseason game as well, and we haven't seen that from Jackson Carman. We haven't seen that level of consistency, and yes, he's a rookie. He's going to have rookie mistakes, but Jackson Carman is still making the same kinds of mistakes. We saw it last week against the Arizona Cardinals. So if you have a guy that's showing more promise, you put the better player on the field, and the better tape at this point, I would say, is in Cordell Volson's favor. I also thought, by the way, that Adeniji and Hill both played pretty well after Adeniji had a pretty dreadful time in the first preseason game. Outside of one tough rep against Kayvon Thibodeau early in the game, and Thibodeau got him. He did. But outside of that, he held his own. He had some nice reps against Thibodeau as well. He finished the game really strong. Trey Hill, every time I watched him, and I didn't watch him a ton, so this does have a disclaimer of needs rewatch for Trey Hill and Adeniji, really for all three. But my first impression was that Trey Hill played pretty well too. Was moving guys in the run game. I mentioned against Dexter Lawrence early in the game on a combo block with Volson. I thought they got some good movement there. And so I thought all three of those guys played well. But the thing with Volson that really I think is important is, outside of wearing down a little bit, getting tired toward the end of the game, maybe a sign that his conditioning needs to improve a little bit. The Bengals only had 61 or so offensive plays. There might be a few more with some penalties in there against 70 plus for the Giants. Maybe the conditioning needs some help, but Volson looked better against backups, which is what you would want. If you're left guard that is maybe competing for a starting spot, looks passable, looks good enough against the starters from the Giants in the preseason, and then looks good to standing outside of just a handful of snaps against the Giants backups. That's what you would expect if a guy is going to be your starter. That's what we talked about with Jackson Carman in week one. If you all listened to the episode going into preseason week one, I think we agreed that Jackson Carman, if he's going to be your starter going against Arizona's 2s, 3s, and 4s, should have a really good first half. Should look better because he is a starter. He is a second-round pick from a high pedigree school, was a highly recruited high school player. If he's going to be that guy for you, he should be beating the lower level of competition from the Cardinals, and he didn't do that. Carman, on the other hand, did that when he had the opportunity late against the Giants. I just think a lot is going in his favor at this point. Jackson Carman will have to have a heck of a week in these joint practices, assuming he gets healthy from this bout with COVID. He'll need to do really well against Aaron Donald in these joint practices. He'll need to do really well in this final preseason game for him to instill any doubt in the coach's mind that Volson shouldn't be the guy.
I don't know if he's going to face Aaron Donald. I don't know if he's going to even get that chance. And I don't, because if you've seen all of this from Volson, and now guess what? I want to get Volson as many reps as possible against the best defender on the planet, right? And that's the part of it. Get him as much experience as possible, because it seems like he is going to be the guy. And that you're right. The thing I loved at the end of the game, Cordell Volson's still in there. It was really the only reason it outside of it's our job to watch. Yeah. And guess what? He got movement. And Jack Patrick just cruises on into the end zone. That should have been the game winner. I had it written, Volson makes the block that leads to the game-winning touchdown. That's the thing, is there were so many more positives than negatives. And I know that Jackson Carman took a beating after that Arizona game. And that doesn't mean that there weren't some positives, because there were, right? But the negatives overwhelm the positives, especially when you consider the competition. Well, this guy in Volson, Cordell Volson, he just overwhelmed the negatives with a bunch of positives. And given the guard play that we're used to seeing at Paul Brown Stadium at the time and now Paycor Stadium, it's a breath of fresh air, because he's going to be, in an ideal world, their worst starting offensive lineman. Well, I think that is awesome compared to what we've seen in recent years, given the sample size that we've gotten now, which is a game and a half of football plus all of these reps throughout training camp. He looks like one of these guards that's going to be under the radar that ends up making a big difference for a contending team like the Bengals. We have a ton to get to, a ton to react to, including we talked about One Hill and Trey Hill. Did you see Dax Hill on Sunday night? Dax Hill looked mighty, mighty fine. We'll dive into him and more next. But first, a word from BetOnline. BetOnline is a one-stop shop for all things sports wagering. So if you want to wager on Dax Hill to be defensive rookie of the year, maybe you think the Bengals now with Cordell Volson leading the charge at left guard, they might set all these records on offense. And you think Jamar Chase is going to be the offensive player of the year. You can wager on that. Joe Burrow to be MVP or the Bengals to get it done, finish the job, and win a championship this year. You got to go to BetOnline right now and sign up for free today. It's really easy to do and start making money. And it isn't just NFL, by the way. Maybe you wanted to wager on UFC on Saturday night. You didn't know where to go. BetOnline is a one-stop shop. Auto racing, MMA, anything and everything in between. Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA futures. Go there now. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Dax Hill was really good. He played with the defense at the start of the game. He played against the New York Giants starters. He got an interception off a deflected pass, tip drill, Bengals favor. The Giants also had a tip drill go in their favor early in the game. But he consistently shows the next level athleticism, the pedigree, again, highly recruited as a high schooler, was incredibly athletic in the Michigan defense. And that athleticism continues to show up in the NFL. The acceleration on the third down tackle that leads to the turnover on downs on the Giants' first possession is A, great recognition, B, great acceleration, and C, he finished the play. All great things for him. He also showed sticky man coverage when he was in that situation and came from a single high position on another play on that first drive to make a good tackle. Dax Hill continues to show that he is ready for the NFL game. He's shown incredible versatility, which is something that we were hoping to see from him and expecting to see from him based on his use and attributes from a scouting perspective at Michigan. And it continues to be refreshing that this guy that the Bengals drafted at 31 looks like he can make an impact long-term, just building on a solid camp, a solid preseason with another nice performance early against the Giants.
Yeah, you see the athleticism, the burst, right? I love that you pointed out the acceleration because it's really hard to get there and then make the tackle and do both. And he did that. And that's something a lot of safeties don't do or can't do, especially at this stage. And he's that guy. I talked to him. It wasn't Friday. It was Thursday. And I was like, 2 picks this week? He was like, 2. I hope I get 1. I was like, 2 picks this week. And I might have made a comment or two about the Giants quarterback situation, but I'll keep that to myself, Jake Liscow, in Locked On Bengals listeners. Anyways, he kind of laughed, and it was good to see though that he was able to get that one, and it's a heck of a play. I mean, that I thought it was coming back. Honestly, I thought they were just going to overturn it initially. So good for him, and good for him to pop up. By the way, this is stupid, right? It sounds silly, but he would have been down. It would have been down in college, and so he popped up right away and kept running, and. Yeah, I think he's a player. I think, and the fun part about it for me is his role is obviously going to change when Jesse Bates gets back in a couple of weeks. But I think Lou Anarumo is going to be able to use him in so many different ways. And this guy, he's athletic, smart enough, all of these things. He's ready to go. And like you said, ready for the NFL. So is he going to play deep all the time? No, that's not going to happen with Bates around. But whatever he does, I think he's going to be able to help this defense and be a sneaky weapon that Lou Anarumo can use in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've seen in the preseason from him as well, insofar as
blitzing off the edge.
They'll put him anywhere. Yeah, I mean, he's lined up over the slot. He's lined up deep. He's lined up. The third down stop, he was essentially in a linebacker alignment, and he's playing a hook curl, I think. Maybe he's responsible for the flat there. He gets out to the flat, certainly, to make the tackle. To get off the field, but you're seeing him align everywhere. You're seeing him in an abundance of responsibilities. And so will his role change when Bates gets back? I don't actually know if his role does change when Bates gets back. because they'll move Bates around too, right? And so it's like his role changes, yes, that he'll be on the field less because he's not going to be on the field for 100% of the snaps, but it would probably behoove Lou Anarumo to find creative ways to get those three guys, Von Bell, Jesse Bates, Dax Hill, on the field together when Jesse Bates returns. And the other silver lining here, and the Bengals have been pretty consistent in saying that they expect Jesse Bates to, when he's ready to show up and be ready for week 1. And we could see him show up immediately after the final preseason game and be present for all those practices leading up to week 1. Who knows really what we'll see? We haven't really had any clear indicators there for a while, but if he doesn't show up, you have Dax Hill. If he's not ready, if he needs an extra week for whatever reason, you have Dax Hill. I'm just looking at his snaps from week 1, James. He had 8 snaps in the box in week 1, 5 of those in a linebacker alignment. He had 8 snaps playing slot corner in preseason week 1. He had 23 snaps playing free safety. He also had 3 snaps out wide at corner. So he's lining up all over the place, is Dax Hill. And it's great preparation for him, I think, in that his use in terms of where he aligns is going to be similar. But you're right that he will probably lose snaps, you would assume, upon the return of Jesse Bates.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he'll lose some snaps. And that's part of it. I also, though, I think it's good to see him in this role now. And here we go. Now we're going to go down the speculative role. Easy to see how he fits with Von Bell, is it not? I'm just throwing that out there, right? I mean, if there was a guy that was going to sign an extension before the start of the season, we know Bates can't do that. Maybe the Bengals do that, and they say, look, we like this tandem now. Dax is 21, Bell's 27 for the next couple of years. That's a hell of a 1-2 combo. And so who knows? Maybe not. Maybe that isn't something that happens. But no, I think that when you look at the Bengals, right, how are they going to get better this year versus last year? Everyone talks about the offensive line. Everyone talks about Jamar Chase being even better, or T. Higgins or Joe Burrow taking a leap, and he was healthy, and all of these things, healthy offseason, all those things. The defense might be better, and it might be better because of a guy named Dax Hill, and it might be better because Eli Apple might be even more improved than he was a year ago, and because Joseph Osai can be the guy that they were hoping he would be. And by the way, the 4th and 1, guess who was in there? 58. Because maybe Cam Sample can make a little bit of a leap. Made a nice play on the opening drive as well. I was excited to see both of those guys. So it's like, I think there's a path where this defense is even better than it was a year ago. And this defense carried them in the playoffs for most of the postseason, which it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it could be better. There's so many factors. I think the biggest indicator, I like John Sheeran's video on Twitter about this today. The biggest indicator that this team is going to be better in 2022 is that the offensive line should be better. It should make them more consistent on offense. That's pretty succinct. But you're right that a lot of people are sleeping on this defense that took major strides in the playoffs, in particular down the stretch, to help this team get to the playoffs in the first place. Should not be overlooked by any means. Also shouldn't be overlooked cornerback depth. Trey Flowers did play a little bit early in this game, only 13 snaps or so. And then it was the young guys, the guys fighting for roster spots: Jalen Davis, Allen George, Delonte Hood. Delonte Hood had a game to forget. All these guys at times gave up some plays, and the Bengals will probably need at least one of them to stick on the roster. I think that will be Jalen Davis, who, by the way, blitzed a ton in the second half. Maybe a preview to come for Mike Hilton, getting some of those slot blitz looks in. But Jalen Davis, to me, is a backup slot corner right now if they don't think Dax Hill can do that role. But Allen George did have some nice plays. I thought that, he gave up some plays. He had some nice plays. It was a bit of a mixed bag. Looks good enough to me to be a practice squad guy for sure. And with Cam Taylor-Britt's core muscle surgery, maybe they do need him for a week or two early, but it also wouldn't surprise me here or at offensive tackle for them to find a veteran to bring in to just bolster the back of those rooms, because Deontay Smith, rough first game back, could be rust. He had some injury stuff. He didn't practice a ton. He did practice later in the week, obviously, but missed some time with the injury. had those holding penalties early in the game. Could be another spot that we see a veteran. James, like you said, plenty more to talk about here, including being deprived of seeing Evan McPherson attempt a 65-plus yard field goal for the Bengals to try to tie this game at the end of the game. But we'll get to the rest of the notes, including on skill players, running back, specialists, to finish the show coming up next.
You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, it still doesn't stop someone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over.
James, let's wrap up preseason week 2. Let's start with let's start with the skill players, because I know that's your favorite part of football anyway. You're a wide receiver guy, James. That's your position. I'll just let you talk about what stood out to you the most at wide receiver before I offer my perspective on what we saw from the Bengals guys in preseason week 2.
Well, let's start with Kwamie Lassiter, because I've been talking up Kwamie Lassiter for most of training camp. It feels like when you're doing practice takeaways, it's like, 18 made plays. And then that didn't happen in preseason game number 1. And I don't know if that was necessarily his fault, but then he goes out there and he goes 7 targets, 7 receptions, 91 yards, and plays really well. Now, some of those yards, about 30 of them, came on that final drive. 30 or 40 of them came on that final drive, but he had 5 receptions for 59 yards going into that final drive. And look, I thought he played well. I thought he worked well with multiple quarterbacks. And the drive that kind of set the tone was that first drive of the third quarter, where Zach's like, nope, we're going to put Brandon Allen back out there. They clearly weren't happy with how the offense was looking. Mm-hmm. And Lassiter made big plays, made multiple catches on that drive. Did have the drop 2-point conversion. He's going to want that one back, no doubt about it. The Bengals would have lost anyway, for what it's worth. But overall, I thought that he flashed. And then the other guy that, look, I've been calling him Trent Edelman for a reason. The over-the-shoulder catch and getting both feet down on that 4th and 1. Love the call. Love the ball from Brandon Allen. And then Trent Taylor finding a way to get it done. So those are the 2 guys that stood out the most tonight. Obviously, there are others. Kendrick Pryor had 4 catches, but those are the 2 that stood out the most to me.
Kwamie Lassiter also drew a little pass interference call. I started writing a tweet. He's caught every one of his targets. This one he didn't catch, but that's because of a DPI. So not only did he have the 7 catches for 91 yards, including, according to PFF, 3 of those contested, one of which I very clearly remember. He kind of double caught it, but I thought it was a really nice hands catch in traffic over the middle on a little slant. Lassiter had a nice game. Had a really nice game. And the Trent Taylor catch on the sideline, ballsy play call for one, especially without Joe Burrow there to throw it, trusting Brandon Allen to drop that ball in the bucket, which pretty good ball for Brandon Allen there up along the sideline. Didn't leave Trent Taylor a lot of room to make that play, but great concentration, great catch from Trent Taylor there. I think that Taylor is on the team at this point. I think that there's not much arguing that. Mike Thomas did play in this game. He had 16 snaps this week after not playing, if I recall correctly, in preseason week 1. Stanley Morgan Jr. had 7 snaps. So it seems like those 3 are on the roster. Lassiter didn't get as many snaps with the starters, or the quote-unquote starters, early in the game. Only 3 snaps early in the game before Mike Thomas departed. This is numbers from Nate Jonke with PFF. But he did have a fantastic performance down the stretch, and certainly is a guy, along with Kendrick Pryor, that I think the Bengals would be thrilled to have in the practice squad. I don't know that there's a massive threat of them losing either of those guys if they do try to get them onto the practice squad, but we'll see if they're enamored enough with one of them. We'll have to go check out coverage teams probably to see how Kendrick Pryor and Kwamie Lassiter performed in coverage teams to see if either of those guys will be in consideration for a 7th wide receiver spot for the initial roster. Lassiter looked frustrated, and you can't blame him for his lack of opportunity to return kicks every time he went back there. Who's the Giants kicker, Gano, was being evaluated for a concussion, and so they had their punter Jamie Gillum doing kickoffs, and he was just banging the ball through the end zone. Kwamie Lassiter's back there just like, man, come on, let me return a kick. Let me put something on tape. The punts didn't really have great opportunities to return punts either. So unfortunately, through two preseason games, we haven't had a great look at Lassiter as a return man, but really good game for him as a receiver. Also, Jaquez Patrick was pretty good in his snaps late in the game. Had the benefit of some really good blocking. Like I said, Adeniji Volson Hill from left tackle to center played pretty much the entire game and were moving bodies on the Bengals' final touchdown drive. Patrick should have had that, as you said, game-winning touchdown. The Giants, of course, behind Davis Webb, who was 22 of 27 for 204 yards, by the way, and 2 touchdowns late in this game, with a guy named Alex Bachman going for 11 catches for 122 and 2 touchdowns on 14 targets. I mean, talk about a day to remember for those guys. But a good showing for Patrick. Chris Evans as a runner, again, had some nice plays nullified by penalty. It seems like all of these penalties come when he's bouncing outside and putting his edge blockers in kind of unenviable situations, but Deontay Smith could certainly have done a better job than he did on some of those plays. But where Chris Evans stood out was as a kick returner. We talked about this from the first game when they used him as a kick returner in 2021. His athleticism and innate feel, his vision and ability to just make plays shows up in the kick return game to a significant degree. And he had a massive kick return to put the Bengals in scoring range in the first half, 73 yards. And he just looks to me so natural doing that. And I know they want to see Travion Williams, and they're treating it as their sort of a competition because Evans did play into the third quarter, but I don't need to see more Chris Evans in the preseason because I think he has a role for this team to help them win games in 2022.
No doubt. No, there is no kickoff return battle, right? Kwamie Lassiter, has no shot of that. He's not going to return kicks for the Bengals if Chris Evans is healthy and out there. And we saw why. And look, I think he could be RB2 in my eyes and in a lot of people's eyes. And I think the Bengals are really loyal to Samaje Perine because of the pass blocking element of it. And I understand that. I do. At the same time, Chris Evans gives them some juice and is this hybrid back that can run great routes and give you a burst of energy when you needed it on kickoff team, and then also make plays with the ball in his hands on offense. So I'm excited to see him. 73 yards, man, just shot out of a cannon. So really excited to see him. By the way, on the Lassiter thing, last thing, I think he's ahead of Kendrick Pryor. If I had to say today, like if I had to rank them, I think he is ahead, even though both guys have had one big preseason game in back-to-back weeks. Clay Johnston, by the way, the other one that stood out, you were running off that quarterback wide receiver combo, and I'm like, man, you looked up Clay Johnston with just a game. How many times has he had 20 tackles in any game? You know, I don't know if many guys get that at this level or any level. And so, he finished with 20 tackles, had a sack. 16 of those tackles were solo tackles. So heck of a game for him. Number 44 for those wondering. And I know the local broadcast did the Brett Favre piece where it's the picture of Brett Favre holding a young Clay Johnston, throwing him like he's a football or acting like he was going to throw him like a football. So there is that connection, which is kind of cool. But it was good to see him rack up the tackles. I don't know if he's going to be able to make this team, but he certainly put some decent tape out there and racked up the stats.
A lot of these guys just played the entire game. Zach Carter, again, out there a ton. Didn't see him making as many splash plays in the backfield. Jeff Gunter got back there on one play in particular that was nice. It was a completed pass for Davis Mills, but Really good play for him to dip under a couple of blocks and have a good quarterback hit there. Last thing, probably specialist Evan McPherson missing a field goal. Crazy 58-yarder wide left. And outside of that, 3 of 4 on field goals. Drew Chrisman doing all of the punting in this game. And on the Evan McPherson field goal, a matter of some controversy, James. Cal Adamitis, the long snapper, snap looked a little high. Not that was necessarily cause for Evan McPherson to miss a field goal. The snap looked like it got down and was held well, and I think it was Huber holding on that play. But the snap was a little bit high, and that might be all it takes for Clark Harris to really drive this thing home. The other bit is Drew Chrisman's punting. He had 3 punts in this game. He had one 55, 56-yard punt where he made the tackle, which I don't think I've ever seen before. That wasn't a last man back kind of thing. He was screaming down the field. It was a 17-yard return, and he made the tackle, which is impressive, I think, but also a bit weird. Outside of that, had one nice punt to pin the Giants inside their own 20, and another that was returned for 11 yards. So what I noticed there is that both of his longer punts that weren't into the end zone area, into the other team's red zone kind of area, were returned for 10-plus yards. And so I wonder if that's on him or if that's on coverage. Would have to go back and take a look, but that'll be something I'm sure that Darren Simmons looks at as well.
Yeah, I think I would blame coverage, but we'd have to look back and see, I guess. But I think they wanted to get a look at Drew Chrisman. That's why he did, the punting duties, and it was still only just 3 punts because there was a couple 4th downs and things mixed in there. But the holding part of it, he's done a good job.
Yeah.
He's done a good job. He wasn't holding, not that it was Kevin Huber's fault on McPherson's miss, but he wasn't holding on that miss. And so if you would have told me that he was going to break even as a holder before camp, before preseason, I would have said he's got a real shot. And I still do. I think you're right about Cal Adamitis. I think he was kind of, if anything, that's going to hurt his chances of landing elsewhere than it would, beating out Clark Harris. I think it is Clark Harris's job. But I can't say that about Kevin Huber. And I also think it's kind of weird, unique. I don't know. Like, is Kevin Huber going to punt all the punts against the Rams? Like, it's just weird to me. I don't know. I don't know what to make of this battle right now, because it feels like Drew Chrisman might be ahead, but I don't know that, and I'm really speculating. And I don't have a feel for it the same way I have a feel for the Cordell Volson battle with Jackson Carman, for example. Because I do think Carman could have ran away with that if he had played well against the Cardinals, and it was the exact opposite. And right now, I almost lean Chrisman barely, but I don't have nearly the confidence in that. And when I say that,
I think they need to see more from Chrisman. I think he'll probably punt a lot or have the opportunities to punt a lot against the Rams as well, because it could just be, which is kind of what Simmons said, he feels really comfortable that he knows what he's getting with Kevin Huber as a punter. And if he's not sure yet, needs to see a little bit more in games from Chrisman, we'll see, because it is a bit odd to not have both guys competing, but there were only 3 punts in this game. So there are limited opportunities, and if he feels like he knows what he's getting with Huber and needs more live reps to evaluate Chrisman, then maybe that is the explainer. Last note for me before we get out of here, James, forgot to mention Noah Spence, who was, I thought, the biggest standout for pass rushers for the Bengals in this game. Looked fairly athletic, and I noticed him a few times watching the game live. PFF also seems to agree. They have him at 3 pressures and beating his blocker another 4 times when the ball came out quickly. So it sounds like they seem to think he also had a nice second preseason game, and where they're dealing with some injury now, with Khalid Kareem dealing with a hamstring injury at that position, Wyatt Hubert's retirement, Jeff Gunter and Noah Spence could both be in the mix potentially for a spot along that edge, especially if Khalid Kareem is injured and can't finish out the preseason process and can't play. Any other notes from you, James, before we get out of here?
Looking here, I think we hit on most of them. I think the Osai part of it, he didn't play a lot, but the fact that he showed a little bit, I think that's all you need to see. I'm actually excited to watch him in these joint practices this week, because this dude has gotten under, it seems like, everybody's skin at one point or another during practice, which is great. So that's the part. I know a lot of fans are excited to see him, and this preseason and going into it, it was like, man, Joseph Osai. Turns out he might be able to bring that, and I've liked what I've seen from him. So I think we've hit on everything. I have a whole page here full of notes, and I think we've hit on it all. But Osai, I just wanted to highlight him one more time because I think that could be a path for the Bengals to be better on defense this year, along with my guy Dax Hill.
That jogged my memory for one more on the defensive line, which is Tyler Shelvin, who played a lot more in this game, and I did not really notice much. We'll have to see on rewatch if he stands out a little bit more, if there are some plays that he made that I didn't notice, but didn't see much when I was watching him and didn't catch my eye when I wasn't specifically watching him. So hopefully Tyler Shelvin played better than my initial impression. We'll find out on rewatch, and we'll get those thoughts to you a little bit later this week. That's it for preseason game 2, the recap in the books, game 2 in the books. Just one more short week of preseason action before the Bengals start preparing for week 1, September 11th against Pittsburgh. Until next time, Bengals fans, thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.